You ever been here? You are playing a horror module intended to terrify your players, yet they come in guns blazing and kicking down the door and power attacking anything that moves. Meanwhile, the wizard is slinging fireballs and flying around like Superman. And don't worry, on the off chance that anyone suffers a fatal wound, the cleric always has Revivify at hand. These are the reasons I think.
Curse of Strahd sucks.
A giant gothic castle, a demiplane surrounded by poisonous fog, and an evil vampire simp. What's there not to like? Well, you see, my issues aren't exactly with Curse of Strahd campaign itself, but rather with the system of gameplay that 5e and the newer 2024 D&D incentivize. When I think of horror, I think of a protagonist pitched against an evil beyond anything that they could dream of, something that dwells in the dark and crushes any bit of hope that the players might have. Think of all your classic horror movies. How often is it that the protagonists have to deal with something that is far beyond their control? Look at the classic 1931 Dracula movie. Dracula is an absolute unit that is unstoppable by what seems to be any means. It's not until the very mortal protagonists outsmart him and use strategy to bring him down. My issue with 5e is the scale of power. PCs tend to be more like Marvel superheroes than protagonists fighting against an ancient evil. With spells like Fly, Revivify, and Invisibility, the dangers and horror elements seem to just leave the game completely.
But Mr. Eldritch, you could just buff up the enemy monsters and make the spells less effective.
From my experience, chasing power levels or nerfing the party doesn't go over very well. Many 5e players enjoy being overpowered, and it's pretty much an element of the game at this point. For example, when my party played Curse of Strahd, I had a party of 4 pretty seasoned 5e players and 1 new player. The 4 veterans poured through the rulebooks and made extremely optimized characters. And then, well, let's call him Bob. Bob was a basic monk. Even using point buy, Bob was hardly doing any damage on his turn, as the rest of the party was laying down insane damage. The system really relies heavily on min-maxing. When it comes to the module itself, I have very few issues with it. Most of my issues really rely on the cartooniness and the lightheartedness of the content rather than the actual writing. I mean, look at these 2 versions of Strahd. The campaign itself is fun, and there are some generally really good ideas within, but I think the issue mostly relies with running horror in 5e rather than the actual module. TTRPG horror works well with games where the PCs are squishy, where they have limited resources, and any and all combat is something that they fear and try to avoid. Systems like Call of Cthulhu, World of Darkness, and OSR fantasy systems really capture the fear and dread of a true horror atmosphere. In OSR systems, players have their cold steel, a handful of spells, and their minds to try to take on the horrors around them. If I was to run Curse of Strahd today, I would either run it as the original i6 Ravenloft, or I would do a conversion of the Curse of Strahd module to a more grimdark horror setting. So what are your thoughts? Have you successfully run horror with 5e in the past? Have you made any changes to make the system work better in a horror setting? Let me know in the comments below. And as always, don't forget to like and subscribe to receive the blessing of Ord.